Hello, everybody. Welcome to another session of DevUp with myself, Paul McCollum, and the infamous Adam Olshansky. I'm a cloud architect at Accenture. Adam, you tell everybody a little about yourself, please.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Paul. My name is Adam Wolshansky. I'm a developer and architect with Salesforce at Google Play.
And this is an increasingly misnamed series of 9 or 10 or 13, or we're not really sure. We're going to keep going until we get everything done. Sessions where Adam and I try and talk people through some of the critical concepts for becoming a developer inside of the Salesforce ecosystem. There's some classic school-taught development concepts that you can cherry pick and learn that will help you on your path to becoming a Salesforce developer, but you definitely don't need to jump into each and everything. So we're cherry picking our favorite, most critical topics and trying to go through them. This session is going to cover some of the confusing words that are used whenever you're talking through pieces and places that are part of the Salesforce ecosystem. Apps, lightning, and clouds. So we'll go through and try and kind of unfuzzy those concepts so that you can know where you're trying to dig in and get started. So first slide is you probably need to know a little bit better how the internet works if you're going to become a developer. There's a lot of layers and there's a lot of systems out there that things go through for you to get through. So if your understanding is that your phone is kind of magic and your computer, your desktop computer, laptop is a window into the internet and it's magic. There are about 300 or 400 different miracles that are happening in between the screen and things getting to you. As a developer, you'll have to learn a few more of those to be able to be nimble with the tools that are out there. One of the main concepts, so we'll be talking about applications. Your browser is an application that runs either on your phone or on your desktop. The browser is making network connections out to servers, asking for information, giving information, and getting it back. We won't talk too deep on network stuff, but DNS, packets, encryption, all of those are really key concepts that you'll want to understand eventually as you're starting to develop. Developing secure code is a very big deal right now, and technically always has been, but it's gotten a lot more attention lately. So you'll need to, you'll want to understand these concepts. I think we may have a separate session entirely on just network and security. But then that final layer is when you actually hop through your laptop, through your application, through the web, through the network, to a server that's hosting an application or system like Salesforce, like Gmail, like YouTube. You're dealing with the data and applications and logic and code that's running back there. So it's really important to know that those, at least those basic layers are there. Adam, did I skip over anything here?
I don't think so. Actually, funny story in an interview I had a little while back, one of the questions was explain how the internet works. And I definitely do not have a great concept of all of this. And so I was able to share what I did know, and I ended up getting the job. So apparently it was good enough. But but yeah, definitely a lot going on here. The more you understand, the better. And there are definitely parts of it that can help you. In your job as a Salesforce developer, or even as you progress and if you choose to go the technical architect route, a lot of how the network is working and how systems are talking to one another becomes increasingly important.
Gotcha. I love nerding out over DNS. If you haven't been bored to sleep by me talking DNS and all of the stuff that goes on, talk about how the internet works. It's the super key one that is really weird, but I love geeking out on other people.
It also seems to be the culprit for when Salesforce has its seemingly yearly outage. It always seems to be a DNS issue of some kind.
Yeah, all of the load balancing and high scalability really has to do with tricking DNS into working slightly different than it was designed to work. So it's kind of fun to talk through those. And yeah, there's with how badly it is, I would say, exploited to work different than it was originally designed. It's interesting. So, all right. So, yep, the first interesting concept, the cloud. You hear terms like born in the cloud, the Salesforce cloud, Sales Cloud, and Service Cloud. The original term that I learned back in probably in the mid 90s, was more related to grid computing and distributed load, that there was a vague out there that could all be joined together to work on things. It was kind of mixed server farms, distributed processing, grid computing, clusters, and the cloud has really just turned into almost another name for pockets or groups of the internet that people can stamp their brand on. Clouds can mean SaaS applications, PaaS applications, but there's a lot of different terms, and they get misused a little bit inside of Salesforce. So the Salesforce cloud has the Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. I think the funniest bumper sticker I've seen that's actually pretty accurate is the cloud is just somebody else's computer.
That's what I was thinking too. That's usually how I explain it to people.
Yeah, we originally, there's co-locations, which are where server farms are located and you rent and put your servers there. I think kind of the traditional modern version of it is resources that you can't actually touch is a cloud. If you can go into a server room or if you can go see your server, it's probably not a cloud. You're still at that co-location era. So, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, the way I think about it is kind of what that bumper sticker was saying, right? I could create a Microsoft PowerPoint and I can save it to my computer, or I can create a PowerPoint and I can upload it to Google Drive in the cloud. It's not stored on my computer anymore. It's stored on, for all I care, somebody else's computer. It's somewhere else in the clouds, and that's, I think, the easiest way to think about what's happening at least.
Yeah, and I didn't realize how much of a challenge it was going to be to describe cloud from starting with, explain what cloud is. But the other piece, another component of cloud that is kind of understood is there's a little bit of expectation of backup and load balancing and availability. If it's in the cloud, it's safe from one server going down isn't going to impact the cloud. If my stuff is in the cloud, it's being backed up. There's a certain amount of security expected there, that somebody is maintaining that cloud and that I'd have less to worry about than a single drive or device outage of my personal system.
Yeah, I guess there it depends whose cloud it is. If you're using a trusted cloud, that's probably true. And I'm guessing there are probably a lot of cloud applications that maybe are not as trusted, that may not have all those things you would expect necessarily, things like backup and restoring and redundancy and things like that, recovery. But theoretically, if you're using a trusted cloud platform, those things are generally built in.
Yep. So it's entered the general vernacular, and it's kind of part of the connotation is, don't worry, it's in the cloud.
Well, so okay, yeah, if you think about it in regards to Salesforce, and I guess you don't see it too much anymore with domain names, but if you think about what pod you're on, right? Usually in URLs you used to see, NA50 whatever. That's just a collection of servers or computers, if you want to think about it that way. That Salesforce is storing your data, and so that's what they mean when they're talking about the cloud. It's some resources that they have that they're storing everything on.
Yeah, and even those are loosely named, and they can be spun from different sets of hardware behind the scenes, and it's really just a set of names and a group of people that are pointed at the roughly similar group of resources. I'm putting together a post on that as well. Yeah, that rabbit hole goes deep, and that is a good place to go look and understand some of the meta architecture of Salesforce's status.salesforce.com, and you can go see all the different places that they have at least different namespaces set up. But even there, their storage is distributed and isn't just one server. So anyway, I think that's enough on cloud. All right, so already covered this. I should have looked at my preview on the next slide, but it's an arrangement of resources that it can adapt to or scale needs. So this is, again, I put the scale connotation on there, which may or may not be true. The backup, the recovery, the fault tolerant are also there. If clouds are distributed or regional, the ones that are closer to the user will be faster. If a copy of a cloud is maintained closer to you, you'll be able to get to it faster. You'll have faster response time, snappier web pages than one that's on the other side of the planet or the other side of the country. Sometimes clouds are spread out and have regional components. Salesforce clouds. Sometimes they're clouds, sometimes they aren't. When we talk about most of the common names that we know, like Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, they're more of an arrangement of functionality. They have a variety of different levels. They're not all the same. They weren't all born at the same time and are quintuplets or octuplets. They are have been brought into the framework at different times and are different levels of maturity and integration with each other. So
yeah, I think some of it's for marketing purposes also, because to me, when I'm a developer, I don't necessarily care if something is in Sales Cloud or Service Cloud. It's all on Salesforce. When you're thinking about like pockets of functionality, if I want, the basic sales functionality, that's going to be, marketed as Sales Cloud. It's going to have, your accounts and your contacts and your opportunities and stuff like that. I might want to provide some service on the platform, and that's going to be, branded as Service Cloud, and it's going to be, cases and knowledge and things like that. When we start getting, like you said, into some of the acquisitions, right? Marketing Cloud is just Salesforce bought a company called Exact Target and said, "Hey, this is Marketing Cloud now," and so they've tried to tie it into various things. But yeah, a lot of the clouds I found to be marketing, just talking about a set of functionality and features that are part of the Salesforce umbrella. That admittedly they are trying to do a better job of tying all together and make it a little bit more seamless.
yeah, so same with the Experience Cloud, which is really just providing another web entry portal into your sales or your Salesforce environment. And with Service Cloud and Sales Cloud, accounts and contacts are all still there, even if you don't buy Sales Cloud or Service Cloud. Cases are there too, but when you turn on or enable those features, more functionality becomes available. But you could have Sales Cloud and Service Cloud both turned on the same environment and use them simultaneously side by side to do different functionalities, all underneath your same vanity banner URL, your pod. So the clouds are kind of features that are enabled on a platform that is kind of specific to you and or the other tenants on your, it's it's hard to divide these and split these hairs.
Yeah, I know. And I think just to touch on that last bullet point on the left side, when I first started out in the professional world, we were dealing with all of our data being on premises or on prem, where we had a server room at my office that had all of our data. And every time somebody was logging in, they were accessing something in our data center. And we really started hearing about these platforms like AWS and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure and even Salesforce that were saying, hey, you don't have to store all your data by yourself. You don't have to buy a bunch of servers and upgrade a bunch of servers and make sure all the servers are connected to the network and make sure all the servers have the right database patches and the right storage. We can handle all of that for you. And you could focus on what functionality do you want to build, what things, to your point, do you want to scale up and down. And so I think the last 10 or 20 years or so, we've definitely seen a rise of this concept of you don't have to host all this anymore. We are going to host it for you, and you can be in charge of all the functionality and the business logic. And I think that's, Salesforce also is doing a really good job of managing all that. So I don't have to think about, I need to upgrade my storage. I have to make sure my stuff's connected to the network. I have to make sure my databases are patched. I have to make sure my server has the right hardware, right? Somebody else is now taking care of that for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's another connotation of the cloud, that there's some scalable resource assignment that you can ask for more disk space. And because you're pulling from a pool, because the Salesforce is buying disks and buying drives and adding capacity. And when people don't need the capacity anymore, it's still there, so you can ask for it. And the on-demand provisioning and resource availability is another component of the cloud that it's part of the cloud connotation, and why Salesforce was one of the very first, and has still, I think, is one of the very best to govern the resource usage of shared resources so well that clients didn't have to worry about other clients. Customers didn't fight with each other for resources, or when I ran a report or I tried to do a backup, the other people that were on the same server didn't have their responses drop to zero. They built their entire framework with the expectation of you only get so much CPU and IO before you're throttled, so that nobody else feels the impact of that. And they've had 20 something years to work on that, where everybody else was still building a lot of the on-premises model. And yeah, I can scale out, I can get you another server. Well, I can buy another server. I just need this much storage. Well, yeah, but yeah, the easy demand-driven consumption model and on-demand provisioning has been a big piece of the cloud success, and one of clearly Salesforce's wins. But all the databases, all of the other physical stuff inside of the Salesforce, the actual cloud, is managed by Salesforce. You really don't see the metal. They have interfaces for you to get to data and so forth. We'll talk about some of those later. But again, that's the difference between the Salesforce, very generic, broad term cloud, and the more specific marketed terms of Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud. And those names change pretty often, but it's important to understand the concept between the cloud, Salesforce is the cloud, and the individual products that they call clouds, which may or may not be clouds, mostly not. So here we've got more of a lineup of how a lot of this stacks up. It's not the greatest analogy, but it should, especially if you're starting from the left to the right. The sales, service, marketing almost has kind of its own separate server. You can have sales and service together on the same thing. A marketing cloud would be a different URL and feel like a different set. The data can communicate, but not specifically connected. Marketing Cloud, as Adam mentioned, was an acquisition. Communities is now called Experience Cloud. This is very close to the sales and service components. Analytics, do we talk about, so from the era of this, and this is an old diagram, Adam, I would consider analytics of this era to be the reporting functionality within Salesforce that's available across most of the core platform.
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things. It is the reporting and dashboard built-in functionality, but I think analytics, like cloud, originally was supposed to be like the Wave
that's right.
Salesforce
Yes.
Analytics product that I think is now called CRM Tableau Analytics or something like that. I don't actually remember
think
what
that
the
Tableau
current name is.
CRM was one of the last
Tableau
ones.
CRM sounds right, but Tableau was a separate product also. But I think that's what the analytics is referring to there, and I presume that has some integrations now with the recent Tableau acquisition.
Yep. Yeah, those are definitely blending. Some of the more industry specifics are being called their own clouds, and I think we've got some examples of those later. Commerce Cloud, Health Services Cloud. Most of these are just variations on the core platform. Salesforce Industries, the acquisition of Velocity, is out there as a set of components that are add-on functionality and objects as well. It's actually quite a bit more complex to describe that. But these are some of the different stacks out here. Quip is another acquisition. App Exchange is an app marketplace for people to sell components of Salesforce functionality. Again, most of those will be operating in here in the core platform, Lightning platform, and Sales and Service Cloud. Am I misrepresenting any of that at all? Any gotchas on there?
No, I think that makes sense. And at bigger companies, oftentimes you won't necessarily see a lot of these clouds being used, you'll just see Salesforce being used as a customizable platform. And so it's that lightning layer that's the most exciting to me, where I can build my own stuff on it, right? I don't have to necessarily use all the built-in out of the box features. I can build my own kind of custom databases and objects and things like that, and just run it on the Salesforce Lightning platform. And that's I think the most exciting
Yeah.
thing to me. But
No, same way. Yeah, I want to. It has the platform is. It's a good development platform. It has a bunch of raw functionality that you can go build up a lot of things on. And one of the barriers that you understand, if you wanted to write something and go test out, if you had access to the platform, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do it on Marketing Cloud. There is a bit of a division there that you would have to hop through. Community, kind of seamless. So just understand that some of these terms and acquisitions, and as their names changes, are going to have they're going to have varying levels of whether you can reach them, talk to them or not. So as you're a dev, you may be jumping into something that's more of a silo than you think, or you may have access to everything that you need. So
yeah, and I actually have my small and medium business shirt on here. And I think for small and medium businesses, a lot of these core functionalities are crucial, because every business has to have some sort of sales, some sort of service, some sort of marketing. And Salesforce is great that they offer those core out of the box features and products to be able to provide a lot of those things, where you might not necessarily be able to have a whole team of your own developers. You might be a single developer trying to support this business, and Salesforce is providing a lot of those core functionalities for you.
Yeah, and just to shout some more of the Kool-Aid drinking, it's been fun to see. So I never really participated in the sales process. I've always worked in IT. I've never worked in a sales business, but there's a huge influx of non-sales related businesses that are flowing into using the Lightning and Core platform that don't have anything to do with sales. They're using Salesforce. They're not doing anything related to sales with it at all. So that's where the lion's share of new development and new implementations, I think, is happening, is people that have seen the light of the capable and growing platform, and it just happens to have the word sales in the name. So. All right, so some other disambiguation, and this is going to be a fairly high-level session from Adam. We're not going to talk too much on actual super technical topics beyond the stuff we gave now, but a lot of this is just understanding as you're coming in, words will be reused in different contexts, and you need to be able to catch those to know where you're talking about. And I struggled through a lot of synonyms and reused words trying to put classical definitions on them. So we're going to try and talk through some of those, and that's most of the power of this unveiling that we're going to try and do. So I'm going to try and stop the presentation so we can do kind of a live notes. We'll see how this goes. All right. So first term, app. So application. This is a man, I've seen people almost come to blows trying to define what an application is. I'm on my desktop and I'm running the Chrome application, and the Chrome application is surfing to the Google application, and when Google search comes up, it points me to the Salesforce application. And once I log into the Salesforce application, I see other applications. And then I build applications, and it's a mess. So let's start through and talk through. So if we want to say a web app, and I would say Salesforce is the web application we're talking about, salesforce.com, and that would be the Lightning platform, kind of per URL. Marketing Cloud would be its own web app. So the full web app container is probably SFDC. Would we come up with another definition? If I build a custom application, a loyalty application for my customers, and I host it on Heroku, and it is talking to Salesforce data, that is its own web app. It lives under its own URL, and it's its own independent code that may or may not be interacting with Salesforce, but it's a separate standalone web app. Talking to other, is that fair?
Yeah.
What else is a good definition? We want to set the outer boundary of what is a web app.
Yeah, I think your definition makes sense. So the Wikipedia definition is application software that runs in a web browser. So I think we got it there. Salesforce, Heroku, like you said, Marketing Cloud, um, and then
Okay.
Marketing Cloud, I think.
So Sales
Marketing
Cloud.
Cloud would be interesting though.
I
Get
wouldn't call
some
Sales Cloud a web app.
no. I think you might have a typo in Marketing Cloud.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
Market Cloud. Good,
yeah,
thank you.
Marketing Cloud. Get some groceries through Salesforce wouldn't be a bad idea. But
I can see that next industries.
yeah, we build that app.
That be
I think things
commerce?
like yeah, commerce, social studio. I feel like is a little bit separate as well. Yeah, basically any separate kind of application you're going to under its own
Okay.
web domain.
Yeah, it seems to be like a bucket of web code servicing. You know, it could be a platform, and with Salesforce, the rabbit hole is deep because we put apps on apps and apps and access them with apps, running on apps, and don't get me started with VDI. So, all right. So what's a Salesforce app? And I think when we get inside of the Salesforce.com web application, Salesforce setup and configuration has some different definitions of what an app is. We have a couple, and I think your groups of tabs.
Yeah, so the definition when we were on Salesforce Classic, it used to be groups of tabs. And now that we're in Lightning, I think it's changed to groups of tabs, Lightning pages, and utilities. And so when we talk about utilities, these are going to be things like Sales Dialer, right? If I have a little phone thing on the bottom of the page to be able to make calls, or if I have right omni-channel running to put myself in and out of the queue, available for work, not available for work, or if I have the utility bar that's pulling up record history or different links and things like that. That's all considered part of my app.
Okay, cool. And you were going to talk us through. Do you mind sharing and kind of showing where some of those configs are?
Sure. All right, so I'm going to take over here. Okay. And so I think it was Gordon Lee who posted an article a while back, like if you want some Salesforce experience, try to think about different use cases in your life that could be use cases for Salesforce. And so for me, I wanted to track all the kind of different things that I'm doing through a sole proprietorship I have. So these are, portal site courses I'm making, work I'm doing for Salesforce, other one-off projects on the side, and I'm just tracking it all through Salesforce. Primarily for tax reasons. When I have to figure out what taxes I owe, I need to figure out, okay, well, what what do I owe taxes on? And so this is a good way to categorize it. I could run a report and it'll show me what taxes I owe and things like that. And so for that, I've created a custom object called business payments. I'm also trying to get better at chess on the side, so I created some objects that track some chess information too. But for our demo purposes, we'll talk about this business payments object I made. And when I created a business payments object, I also said, hey, also create a custom tab. So I have a business payments tab to track all these records. On top of that, I can also create app pages. So on top of just tabs, they don't have to necessarily tie to an object. I created a separate a separate page for my business information home, and as a dashboard with different things, and I could see year over year how I'm doing. I also have another home page for my chess information. And if I want to create a new page, it'll ask me, hey, do you want to create a home page, an app page, or a record page? And so record pages will kind of override the record details in some cases. App pages and home pages are essentially going to be different things that I can then add to a Salesforce app. And so if I go into the Salesforce App Manager, I can see all the different apps I've created. So for example, I have a business app that I've created. And if I go into my business app, I'll see that I have the option to create a name. I have the option to upload an image, and then I can configure, do I want it to be a standard or console type of app? I can specify what utilities I want. So again, these are going to be things like histories, notes, rich text. I can have custom things as well. If I had some of the other sales and service functionality, there are going to be other things I could add as well. And then navigation items are basically the tabs and pages that I want in here. So in here I have a home page for my the business home I created, and I also have some different tabs corresponding to different custom objects and standard objects as well. If I go into another app, for example, the sales app for Lightning, I can look into Lightning sales. And once again, once this loads up, I can go into navigation items and I'll see, once again, I've added my business payments tab to the sales app. And so if I go in the app launcher here, I can choose these apps that I've created, as well as the standard out-of-the-box sales app. And we see here I have a business payments tab. That's my custom tab that I've added. And so we see here this app, it has tabs in it, but it can also have different pages and different utilities. And so when we're talking about apps in the context of Salesforce, we're talking about basically what are the different things I can choose here in my app launcher that I configured from within the app manager.
So if I write Apex code or LWC code, does that track to this definition of app?
I think code is kind of running separately. So if I potentially had a Visualforce page or an LWC, I could add those things to an app page. I could, override record pages. I could have those as tabs that I could add to an app. But I wouldn't necessarily categorize the code itself as part of an app.
Okay, until it becomes part of a managed package, which I think will segue right into one of our next topics.
Makes sense. And even sometimes apps also come into play when we're configuring the Lightning App Builder, and it'll say, how do you want, when do you want this page to show up? You can assign it to specific apps. So I could be looking at an account record in my sales app, for example, and I could be looking at an account record in my business app, and I'm going to see two very different views because I've specified I'm in a different app context. And so the Lightning App Builder can recognize that as well.
Are you able to go to the App Exchange really fast? It says the button's right there on your screen. Visit App Exchange. Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't pull anything weird up. So yeah, these App Exchange apps, just to segue into our next definition, are assortments, packages of Apex code pages that you can drop into your Lightning piece, and that they can be licensed. I think the big difference between managed and unmanaged package is that whether or not you can manage packages, you can't see the code. Unmanaged packages, you can get in and alter or work with the code, or at least see what it's doing. I haven't dug too deep into the App Exchange. I'm like you, I like to build my own stuff, and I don't really have an interest in getting in and trying to market. But a lot of big integrations, companies that have their own services can provide some pre-built application functionality that you can pull into your Salesforce that talks to their cloud or their premises or their data or whatever services they provide.
Yeah, App Exchange is really just kind of the App Store or the Google Play Store for Salesforce. And actually the name App Store actually used to be owned by Salesforce, and Mark Benioff used to work for Steve Jobs and just gave them the copyright for the name. And so that's how Apple got the name App Store. It's from Salesforce. But App Exchange is the same thing. It's just kind of a business app store, basically, where different companies, like you said, Paul, can create solutions for very specific purposes. So Own Backup has a whole backup solution. Get Feedback has, a survey functionality. So there are some cases where it makes sense to custom build everything yourself. And there are some cases where there's no need to reinvent the wheel necessarily. Somebody else has built some functionality that does what you need it to do. And so just like you install an app on your phone, you can just install an app into Salesforce. And usually the apps you'll find on App Exchange are going to be managed, like Paul said, and different companies have built it and they're going to control the code. But you'll also find cases where somebody just wants to share some functionality where you can edit all the code and things like that. You can still install the package into your org and do whatever you want with it. The other thing I'll note, some of these are just Salesforce
There's the
creating
free
kind of
ones. Yep.
add-ons for themselves. Yeah. So
Right where
if
I
you
was
look up
going.
Salesforce Labs, there's actually searches. There are different apps that Salesforce themselves have published that aren't part of the core Salesforce platform, but the Salesforce has built as little kind of add-ons, if you will, that can potentially help you out as well.
Yeah, but one of the big things to understand about the concept of development in general is that on a platform, on a modern platform with security evolving, functionality evolving, browsers, 3D, VR, everything evolving like it is, quantum computing, everything is a moving target. And if you can lean into an existing framework as opposed to writing your own custom code, that custom code may use things, touch things that aren't necessarily automatically updated or kept up by the platform you're writing it on. So getting into or recommending and knowing all of the wheels that are already built so that you don't rebuild them is definitely a value add skill for a developer to have. If somebody asks you to build something like that you knew the dashboard pal does for free, you can launch that, have that up, and be part of this life cycle as opposed to having you or your customer having to manage that code separately, independently. And that's one of the ways you manage technical debt. Custom code can build up technical debt, and you have to continue to maintain it and update it. And reusing or buying solutions that are pre-built can reduce that technical debt. Cool, great stuff, Adam.
Thanks. All right, we can jump back into the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we saw there are some free apps. There are some apps that you can buy with different pricing models. Some are going to be based on the user. Some are going to be based on the functionality. Some are going to be freemium, where you get a certain amount of information and you can upgrade for a cost to get more. Kind of depends on how different companies are selling their apps, but definitely if you're looking for a specific piece of functionality, App Exchange definitely worth checking out to see if somebody already built that functionality and can save you some time and somebody else is going to maintain it. Definitely some value to be provided there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that segue, that's a good cap to talk about a mobile app. Mobile apps are interesting. So there's native-ish that are, let's call them standalone. Let's call native, then we can go native connected, hybrid, and just full on web shell. So to call each of these out, so your mobile phone is its own operating system and has applications that run on it. One of the applications that runs on it is a Play Store or an App Store where you can download other applications. So those are code that will install and run on your phone. A Chrome browser, Safari browser, internet browser is also another application. It's code that's running kind of natively on the operating system of your device, and it can connect to the internet, connect to the web, surf web pages. So the first and kind of most primitive form of app is this native standalone. It is all code that runs on your application and doesn't talk to the internet or web at all. These are sometimes also offline available web applications. And these terms will blur, but we'll just go through some of these just to, again, demystify how different things work. But so this might be a game. This might be Fruit Ninja or something that you're playing. All of the functions are operating on the phone. If you lose internet, if you're in the car, you're on the plane, you can still use it. It is not dependent on any data source. Now, then there are the native connected that are a highly, again, that is a fully custom experience being rendered in the operating system features of your device. So you've got touch-enabled controls that your device knows how to talk to, buttons on the side operate. All of those things are really tightly coupled to your device. Native connected, same kind of thing, but it's accessing, instead of having all the data there downloaded onto your phone and living on your phone, it's actually reaching out to web services, websites, clouds, multiple clouds, applications, web services to put that data on your screen inside of those native applications. The next layer down, I would say, was hybrid. So there are a lot of web apps that are really just a shell with one or two custom buttons that are pulling in native web pages. And you can kind of, when you click into things, you can see the controls that are really just shared and brought in from the web browser that's built into the operating system. So those aren't really necessarily fully native apps. They have some native functionality. They may provide buttons, and then some of them may just be straight up serving a specific set of web pages and letting you click through them. I would say that the Salesforce mobile app falls somewhere in between hybrid and native connected. I would probably say it's more native connected than hybrid. Although you can see some of the artifacts from embedded browsers. But mostly everything on its function is grabbing Salesforce data from the back end and presenting it in a native application framework.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, because there is the like out of the box Salesforce mobile app that has pretty much everything you have in desktop on Salesforce. And then on top of that, though, you can also kind of create your own apps using, I think it's called the mobile publisher, and you can create additional apps that are separate from Salesforce and use those as well.
You can, which you could brand them, and instead of downloading the Salesforce, I think it used to be called the Salesforce One app, and it's now, I think it's a Salesforce mobile app. And then there's a handful of SDKs for Salesforce functionality where you can, we used to call them app kitchens, where you could assemble components and have it render and compile into a something that you could host on one of the app stores with your own branding, with your own names, and with your own permissions. And that would be up here in the native standalone area too. Not full-on custom native app, but it's definitely it's still rendered and delivered to the devices the same way. I think the Omni SDK also is one of those, which is the Salesforce Industries. Velocity has their own mobile app development framework. Not 100% sure on that, where that is still. So cool. All right, well, those are all the different weird terms for apps. And so if you're an app developer, it's important to specify what type of app developer you are. Sometimes it's best to lead in with the language. And that will sometimes help, unless you say JavaScript, in which case that's all over the place now too. I think we have a whole session coming up on JavaScript and what that means. But I think that's good for us on apps. Anything else you want to add, Adam?
No, I think we did a pretty good job of covering it.
Okay. All right, so Lightning, another confusing term. So Lightning, Einstein, and Salesforce are some of their big brand terms. Cloud is another big one. So Lightning can get you into trouble. And as a developer, one of the, you'll want to understand how each of the different usages of Lightning impact what you're doing. I got myself into trouble with these two, embarrassed myself horribly. And I'll talk about that sob story when we get there. But Lightning Platform, I think, Adam, is what we were talking about, the foundational, very malleable cloud, born in the cloud platform that has all the features and functionality we usually talk about. That is the platform that you can enable Sales Cloud functionality and can enable Service Cloud functionality and start stacking those concepts on top of it.
Yeah, so basically the Salesforce platform. I think they rebranded this a few times. It was the Einstein platform, and then it was the Customer 360 platform. But when you hear the term Lightning platform, we're talking about the Salesforce platform, whatever
Yeah.
their current marketing
Yeah, I feel
branding
like
is.
this is the most recent one. And that was Customer 360 was the name for another product. And now they've shifted that brand over to the Lightning platform brand. So it was CDP, then it was Customer 360, and I think it's CDP again. But fun stuff. You will get dizzy trying to learn Salesforce terms. But yeah, usually when I talk about Salesforce, I think that most of the time when we're talking about Salesforce, we mean the Lightning platform, or we're talking about the company in general. Now, Lightning Experience, that's a fun one. Now, I only barely got to touch Classic. I only did one or two things in the Classic experience. And when I landed, Lightning Experience was already a thing. Can you give a good talking through about the difference between Classic and Lightning?
Yeah, so Classic is really when Salesforce launched. They had kind of a UI. Originally, I think that their logo was red, and so there's a lot of red, and then they switched to blue, and there's a lot of blue. But it was just kind of a very page heavy UI. There's a lot of clicking. Everything was on its own page, and it was definitely a product of its era, right? Salesforce was founded, I think, in 1999, and so the UI looked very 90s, aughts sort of thing. And then by the mid 2010s, JavaScript was really catching on, and people really wanted this more app based, right? I shouldn't have to go to new pages and click buttons every time I want to go somewhere new. Everything should just be happening in front of me, and things should be popping up based on my interaction with the product. And so they basically re-architected everything underneath, built a whole new UI layer on top of it that was very JavaScript heavy or JavaScript focused and kind of user focused as kind of the society was moving in that direction, and that's kind of where the Lightning experience came from. And so it was a complete rebrand of the UI on the presentation side, but under the covers they basically rebuilt everything from scratch as well. And I think that was late 2015, I want to say, is
Yep.
when they launched that.
Yeah,
Um,
the Classic interface has a lot of distinct frameworks for putting out functionality that are no longer valid in the Lightning experience. I've to add on to that, yeah, it's really Classic is what it got dubbed once there was a new one. So the old system, the previous UI layout is now called Classic, and there are some people that some companies that built enough functionality in the Classic interface that they aren't able to upgrade to the Lightning interface. So those are some interesting projects trying to reverse engineer functionality and get it to work in the new UI design methodology. It has some progressive load and some of the single page application, which is another of my favorites. When you build code that doesn't actually have a page click and it's just going out and fetching stuff and you never see the browser flash, that to me was classically called a single page application and was very heavy, as an influencer for the Lightning UI experience, where you didn't want people to have to fully reload all the resources and pause and wait, and you gave them that very reactive interface where that button actually did something. It didn't just go away and was replaced by a new page, and you had to completely reorient yourself. Lightning brought that stable experience there. And it has progressive loadings. You'll see different elements can be pulled in and you don't have to wait for them all to load for the page to assemble and render. All right. So Lightning component. So once we started developing in the Lightning experience, and I think Lightning components came out after the Lightning experience, and the Lightning branding got added to this too. This is another JavaScript framework that is somewhat, you can write JavaScript that is compartmentalized and run through a JavaScript interpreter that can talk to Salesforce data and be rendered inside of as a page inside of page. I think you can even render them inside of Visual Force pages that you can mix and match quite a few of these. But is that a fair definition of Lightning component? I feel like I butchered that.
I think it's pretty good. I think again, the old basically if you want to customize the UI in Salesforce, you had some out of the box options with things like page layouts. And then you had one step further, you could really customize it by building Visual Force pages. And again, Visual Force pages were very button heavy, very page heavy. If I wanted something new to happen, I'd have to click a button. There was some minimal JavaScript and kind of stuff happening based on your interactions. But with this kind of, advanced Lightning experience, there needed to be a new way for people to be able to customize the UI. And so at the time, I think when Lightning Experience came out, somewhere around there, at least, Salesforce did adopt this open source JavaScript framework called Aura, which was a very heavy framework that you could use to kind of write JavaScript, but more JavaScript-esque to be able to customize the UI in this kind of new, user interaction-based world, and away from some of the, button-heavy clicking that you had to do on the Visual Force Classic side.
Okay, yeah, that I always get in trouble for that because I always write native JavaScript in Visual Force pages. I will create a new Visual Force page and I won't put any, I will only have the opening tag on it. I don't use any Visual Force Apex, whatever, the control framework at all. I just start writing HTML and JavaScript. And the only thing I ever got stuck on from writing just full native JavaScript applications was the Visual Force doc type was not set to the HTML5 standard. So you would have to use Bootstrap if you wanted to use anything else in there. But I thought it was a perfectly capable shell for putting really good JavaScript in, as long as it was Bootstrap worthy, then.
And I think that's perfectly valid. I think the issue with that is you're kind of doing all of the heavy lifting yourself. You're not necessarily getting some of the functionality that the Visual Force could provide or the Lightning components can provide, where, right, I don't have to be able to figure out how to create my own variables and pass them along. The frameworks are kind of doing some of that for me. So that definitely is some more customizability, but there's also some that you're not necessarily utilizing, which, depending on your use case, is okay, but could be useful otherwise.
Yeah, I didn't find that the component framework did a whole lot of extra work. It seemed like it created a whole bunch of extra hoops to jump through more than anything else. And I was still found myself cheating and going to talking to the document, the DOM directly to get stuff done, as opposed to, and what it is it was a component framework trying to protect code from being able to access the DOM. And so it's been kind of a ratcheting down of writing code that runs in a very specific controlled space. So good stewardship, good security component framework concepts there. And even with the evolution, we can switch Lightning web components, and Lightning components render on the web. Salesforce is on the web. I made some of the biggest, I jumped into the middle of a presentation that was talking about Lightning web components. And I was like, yeah, I've written Aura components on the web. They're Lightning web components, but Lightning web components, we need to put a heavy double quotation marks around that. Let me put the Aura keyword in there for Lightning components, but Lightning web components is an entirely separate JavaScript and front-end customization framework.
Yeah, and Lightning web components are also technically Lightning components. I think what Salesforce found was, back in 2014, 2015, when they were working on the original Aura components, all the JavaScript frameworks were very heavy and doing a lot of hard work, doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And when 2018 or so came around, the browsers actually got a lot more powerful and were doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So the frameworks could be a lot more lightweight. And Salesforce decided, okay, well, we're kind of doing this Aura thing on our own, and everyone else is moving to just utilizing the browser functionality. So we should do that as well. And so they started trying to adopt all these different standard JavaScript libraries and JavaScript standards and web standards to be able to now get to the point where you build a Lightning Web Component, you're writing HTML, you're writing JavaScript, you're not writing these custom Salesforce specific Aura files. And it's getting closer to kind of native web development. So at this point, if you are new to Salesforce, I would mostly skip trying to learn about Aura components and just go straight to Lightning Web Components that are, I think, a little bit easier to use and also a lot closer to standard web development.
I totally agree. Yep, no, that is a great point, jumping point. And every once in a while, you'll hear something that works in Aura but doesn't work in LWC, or the security framework around LWC is not quite ready for it. But this Lightning component framework is not being adopted. Salesforce has, instead of the Aura framework, I think was something of an open JavaScript framework that they were leaning into, but the LWC framework is much more open, much more, does not really owned by anybody, and they are contributing to it. So it's actually bettering the web as we learn this. So that is one of the nice things about learning dev and LWC, that the JavaScript knowledge that you're gaining is applicable outside of the Salesforce ecosystem as well. Aura, not so much. Aura very specific to the Aura component framework. And I don't know if it's probably still being developed. It was a pretty popular framework for a while, but but the LWC stuff, much more native JavaScript, much more reusable. JavaScript is the language that your browser speaks for automation and talking to the DOM. So anything you write for the web is using JavaScript, and the more JavaScript you learn, the more it's applicable. Some of the LWC add-ons, some of the decorators are custom to LWC and the LWC framework interpreter, but most of it will be extremely reusable. So a very portable skill. So, all right, anything else for LWC there?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
Okay. All right, so this just a listing of the core languages. We kind of touched on JavaScript there. Client-side and server-side JavaScript. So code can be compiled and run, and the JavaScript language specification is not always run in the browser as delivered by a web server. It can be run on the browser, compiled on the browser, and the answer can be sent to you and have more JavaScript the client can send to you. HTML is that framework, it's that display. I think I'm just gonna write some HTML here. Adam, is that okay if I just live code? I'm gonna start a basic HTML. So start HTML. What are your thoughts on HTML?
I think it's obviously, the primary three languages of the web are HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So I think they're definitely very important to know. I think I did see if I can bring it up real quick while you're coding, but I did a presentation a while back about Lightning Web Components, and part of it was talking about different languages that are used heavily on GitHub and committed to GitHub. What languages are people using? And I think they did a survey of developers. They had 72,000 responses. At least the last survey I had here was 2019, and I think 70% of them mentioned using JavaScript was in first place. Second place was 63% HTML and CSS. So definitely very heavily used among developers. When you write Visual Force, it all gets compiled down into HTML so your browser can display it. Lightning Web Components have a specific HTML file just for writing HTML. So definitely good to understand how it works. And no matter what custom UI you're using, they're all using tag-based markup like HTML does. So definitely good to try to understand what some of that is.
Yeah, by default, that's what your browser uses to display things, and how we send a string of data over the internet that ends up having a 2D representation or even three-dimensional representation on a screen. So start tag, end tags. HTML is a good one to learn. What if your code's on the web, it ends up turning into HTML. So if you don't understand how what you're writing ends up getting to HTML, you will probably have some struggles. So it will help you. CSS and JavaScript are added on top of HTML to either decorate or activate. The HTML or the displays on the screen, move them around, interact with data, send data back and forth to a server. That's kind of your programming language for the browser, and you can program in languages that send programming languages up to the browser. Writing code that writes code is exhilarating. Crazy, you have to learn how to escape things all the time, but I'd say that, yeah, that's my top one to understand what you're actually doing and how things actually work, is to write small pieces of functionality and go see how, do a view source on the web page and see what the framework is doing for you and adding for you and obfuscating what you did or making it harder to read, and learning to live with that. That fair?
Yep.
SQL or SOQL, structured query language or standard object query language. They're related. I wouldn't say they're quite first cousins, but understanding the SQL, understanding query languages, especially the ones that are built off of SQL. SQL variants like SOQL are very predominant in the industry. Learning SQL or SOQL is not going to be wasted time. You'll just have to understand some different dialects. Anything on that, Adam?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's definitely, SQL is probably a toned down version of SQL for sure. But so if you know SQL, you'll pick up SQL pretty easily. And I think that's probably the same for the last one on our list, Java and Apex. Apex is kind of a scaled down version of Java with some additional kind of Salesforce specific things in there. But yeah, definitely if you know one, it'll probably be pretty easy to pick up the other.
Yeah, so I would say Java and Apex are server languages, and JavaScript, when it came out, I think it was leaning into the popularity of the Java server language, and JavaScript was eventually became ECMAScript, or I don't know, the rough interbreeding that went on there. But Java and JavaScript, make sure you know that those are two entirely different contexts of languages. Apex and Java almost exclusively run on a server and render JavaScript and HTML. You might bundle some SQL or SOQL inside of JavaScript, but not likely. Most of the time, if I were to put an order of operations of where these things took place, I probably would move SQL or SOQL down here, and the Java is actually running closer to the machine, where the HTML is closer to the user in the browser, server, cloud, whichever. But yeah, Java and JavaScript, entirely different languages. 99.9% JavaScript is running on the browser and Java is running on the server.
Yeah, I like the analogy people have said, Java and JavaScript is like car and carpet.
Yep.
Like there's the same root word, but two completely different things.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a huge JavaScript fanboy, but I think they actually stole the Java component from the Java language specification itself. So, but I can't stand writing Java, and I love writing JavaScript. It is, the variants I learned on were very forgiving. And I never had to wait for Java to compile or JavaScript to compile. Java, you do, well, Java traditional you do, Apex, fortunately you don't. All right, some other dev concepts we want to talk about. The model view controller concept. So just like we talked about, and actually maps pretty well with what we did with just reordering those languages above. When the user is interacting, why don't you try this? Will you give a go at it? You just explain this better than I do. I get wrapped up.
Sure. Do you want to jump back into presentation mode real quick? Okay. Yeah, so MVC or model view controller is kind of a common framework to think about how to design applications. And it's based on the concept that every part of your application should kind of have its own job. So you should have one part that's the model. This is going to be your data model, your objects and your fields in regards to Salesforce, right? How is all of your data constructed together? And that's all part of the model. And then you have this view. It's the UI. What is showing up on your screen? What am I able to look at? And this is supposed to be controlling, what shows up, how it shows up, the format, things like that. And it's all tied to how am I representing and displaying what I want a user to see. And then there's the controller part that's controlling all the logic and controlling what happens when I interact with the view. So the view might have a button on it, and I can click a button and it'll launch something in the controller that fires some sort of action, some sort of logic, whether that's Apex, if I'm talking about Visualforce, or whether it's JavaScript, if I'm talking about a Lightning Web Component. But I shouldn't be having logic in my view. I should be having it in my controller. And that's one of the nice things that LWC did. Whereas in Visualforce, I could have logic happening all over the place. Right? I could have some logic in my Apex. I could even throw some logic in my Visualforce page if I want to evaluate some expression. MVC says we don't want to mess around with any of that. The view is supposed to be the view. The controller is supposed to be the controller. And so when I'm interacting with a page in the view, it's going to fire off some action in the controller. And it's just a way to kind of keep your code clean, your application clean, and it's easy to understand where are things happening. If I'm controlling how something is displayed, I look at the view. If I'm controlling what is happening and why, I'm looking at the controller. And if I'm looking at where is all of my data and how is it interacting with each other, that's going to be the model. And so every part of your application is going to have its own separate responsibility. And it makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on when you start breaking it down.
Perfect. Yeah, the separation of concepts and responsibilities helps me. I think that's the best way I've heard it explained so far. One of the first steps you want to go through is kind of, I usually go through the model. If I know what I'm trying to build, I try and understand my conceptual objects. And then I'll usually start trying to mock up my screens to figure out what I'm trying to do with those concepts. Am I listing users? Am I listing cars? Am I buying cars? And then I work from the middle out and try and control, okay, this user should see only this aspect of the cars and not the other. So you can name those, control those, and kind of funnel those to the right piece of functionality. So be aware that there's some structures you want to lean into. This should be the first, most obvious, most high-level structure you want to be getting used to as you're writing code. Be specific when you're writing view code. Be specific when you switch to the model, and kind of keep those separate. They may even be in separate languages or separate. You may be writing LWC here and Apex here.
Well, and so I think one other thing on that point, when we get into the LWC model, we might actually have mobile controllers where we have one JavaScript controller handling some of the browser interaction, and then an Apex controller that's handling some of the backend server queries we need to make. And so oftentimes we'll have our logic in different places depending on what we need it to do. Sometimes we need to make a call to the Salesforce server. Sometimes we can just have things get updated in the browser once we already have the data and just want to look at it a little bit differently. So important to note that as well.
Yeah, and there are other variations. I've heard model view model, the MVVM pattern that people use. But just understand that. Try to think of your applications in different segments and organize them. That will pay dividends in the future. Have a purpose. Don't just write code. Develop applications. I always see that. So build with a purpose. Mm-hmm. All right. So here we'll get into the fairly anecdotal discussion with the weird animation that I put in for no reason on what we're discussing. So as we're talking about developers, so as you're considering a developer's career, and as you're looking at the different types of development options there are, be aware of these different kind of paved stones, leap pads that you can invest your time in and head towards. And with the, we've done a little bit of salary analysis and tried to put some ideas there. When you're getting into Salesforce, There's a pretty wide range of salaries, and want to talk through some of these different types of development and different types of Salesforce career that you can get within, salaries you can maybe expect after a year or two's worth of experience. So where you're investing your time and learning as to paths for your learning and what kind of those careers hold. So everything, your mileage may vary on everything. Adam, you were, let's chime in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and maybe even I might say in some cases, 1 to 2 years may not necessarily be enough. This is again going to depend on user experience, as a Salesforce experience, as a non-Salesforce experience. Where are you located? Either in the U.S., what part of the U.S., outside of the U.S. I think what we're going for here, and we can walk through some of the different titles and what they mean. Your path may be linear from one to the other. Your path may jump around. Your path may kind of intersect. You may be going one direction, another direction, up and down. And this is just kind of some samples of different roles you could have in the ecosystem, paths you could take. But again, you can jump around. A lot of people don't fall nicely into one of these buckets. They're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and definitely a wide range of salaries. We did take some of this from some surveys that were done and some information we found on websites like ZipRecruiter and Glassdoor. But again, I wouldn't go into this saying, oh, 2 years, I'm going to be a developer making 90,000. These are just some of the possibilities you could get from developing some of these different skills over the course of your career. But definitely know that there are lucrative opportunities out there in this field. I think it's good to take home for sure.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that, and I consider like learning the admin concepts the foundation for getting into the Salesforce ecosystem in general. It's mostly around, when I say admin, I'm usually talking about the skills required to pass the admin certification more than I know Salesforce administrators that are off the chart for this salary range because of their skills and their particular experience they bring to it. And you could go from an automation specialist in another language and land as a consultant in Salesforce. Yeah, your mileage may vary. This is just kind of these are, to me, are the low-hanging fruit paths that you can go through, and where I would recommend that, the highest demand I see right now is in that Apex development, and it's really, you can, after enough time learning the Salesforce ecosystem and adding developer and serious developer experience to your resume, that you can start looking for. And if you're trying to pick your path based on salary, these are just some of the notes and numbers that I tried to put with different skills, and they're really rough, and this is all opinion based. If we were saying app builder, after 1 or 2 years, if you were only doing kind of declarative dev, that base salary is probably not quite at the rate it is here. So I'm not editing, so I can't click on that and slide that back a little bit. But anyway, it's just to kind of set your goals. Like I said, if you want to go in, whatever your expectation, but building that base knowledge does have some different pay scales, and developer is a very good one to go after. You can make your own path in any of these skills, but just my 2 cents, encouraging people to explore it as a lucrative career path. Fair enough. Did I stumble all over that this really weird graph that I built?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think the general takeaway is the more code heavy and architecture heavy you are, those tend to have higher salaries. But again, these are aggregates and averages. And as we've said several times, your mileage may vary based on what other experiences you have, technical or sometimes even non-technical. Can definitely help. And then, of course, physical location can play a role in that as well. But hopefully it gives you some of the ideas you can go into. Again, to echo Paul's point, admin is a great place to start understanding the Salesforce security model. And from there, you can branch out anywhere you want. You can go to the architecture route. You can go to the developer route. You can maybe become a consultant, business analyst. a bunch of new designer paths. Salesforce has been increasingly putting out resources for. You can go to project management, QA, solution architect, and jump back and forth between them, kind of depending on what your interests are. Just know, no matter kind of where you fall in the Salesforce space, there's probably a decently paying career out there for you.
Cool. All right. So I think that's our last slide. Our next session is about code location. So we'll talk about some of the topics we brought up and where you can start writing code and where the different places, different opportunities you have to write code and what types of code you write in what types of places. Any final notes, Adam?
No, I think did a pretty good job for today.
Great.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
All right. Thanks again. And we will talk to everybody soon. Watch for the next session.